Hey, thanks for tuning back here again today. Today is the modeling stage or refinement stage where we start to make things sort of come together and make it look more like the reference. Let me pull up my reference. So we have to make the creases and the marks in the backdrop. Now, I forgot to record this. Uh, I don't know why, but I did marks of the curtain where I want the creases to be and all that. But it's nothing. Just because you didn't see this doesn't mean you can't do it. It's very simple, just drawing some lines, having the idea where I'm gonna have my bends, where I'm gonna have it twist and turn. It's creative. It's artistic abilities and changing some things. And then I went ahead and outlined the shirt a little more, where I want to redefine it in the creases. And she has a necklace, and then I did the nose part, widen the eye a little bit. And we're gonna work on these stuff, just refining it, bringing the hair down, making it stand out. That's why I have the crease here. That way, with the light, this part's gonna be brighter, and we can have the hair kind of stand out. But anyways, um, there's not much to say apart from that. Rather than let's get right into it. It's gonna transition straight into a time lapse format, kind of with the voiceover. So I will still be explaining stuff, but you won't hear the raw audio as I have it right here because also I'm going to be playing music. I don't want to get copyrighted. So, anyways, beside the point, let's get started with today.
And we are back here once again. So, what I'm doing here, and you can see I'm showing my palette, but what I'm doing is I'm mixing up the same color just in different values. Same tone, just different values. How that works is let's assume you have the color black. Right here, I don't have pure black. I have a grayed out, slightly blue tint, but we're gonna use black as an example. If you have 100% black, the different values would be black, a little gray, a gray lighter than that gray, and then you would have a light gray and then potentially white. Those are basically the same colors just in different values. Same thing goes with any color. You can use red. Red, you can add a little bit of blue to darken it to make it like a lavender almost. That would be your darkest tone. Then you add a little bit of white, it becomes lighter, like a light red, maybe a vibrant red. Then if you keep adding white, it's gonna turn pink. Then you can go to a white where it barely has pink and then go completely white. So that's the thing that I'm doing here. And so after working it in for a while, I decided I would cover it up because it wasn't gonna work the way I had it planned. So I added that shadow color in the corner, as you can see in the reference. I'm gonna put it up right here. But um I put the shadow and I did a one tone gray color. I know the values are different in the reference, but for now the main purpose is to have a value there. So after having blocked in that base tone, the main thing is having that base where you can build on top. So as you can see, I'm just making sure I have all the areas filled in around the shoulders and between the arms, just having something there and blending it smooth. Um, but later on, hopefully soon, I haven't seen this video in a while, but we build on top of it and in hopes to make it look like a curtain or a backdrop film or whatever you want to think about it. But as you can see here, I'm doing the marks of the shadows. So with that base, you can, that's your mid-tone, the base color, and then you build on top of it with your shadows and with your highlights. So while it appears in the video I don't spend too much time, in reality, I spent a decent amount of time going back and forth with that shadow color just because I wanted to get it right the first time. But the issue is, and I think I covered this in the last video, if you've been working on a project for such a long time, then you cannot um, see the things how you're supposed to, and your mind is kind of frustrated. And so that was the state I was in. I wasn't really um, seeing what should have been done. Instead, I was just knowing what I wanted the end result to be, and I was just trying to do it no matter what. And just before I forget, the colors I used to mix up that gray tone color was ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin crimson, burnt umber, and white. When I wanted for the initial one, because the initial one had a little more blue, if you realized. For this one, on top of that color, I just added a little bit of black to kind of dull it a little bit and give me more of that gray tone. And it's the same thing. On top of that color, I added more black for the shadows you see. And so, really, all I'm doing is just getting in those shadows and tweaking it, and then adding the highlights, making sure everything kind of correlates. But this is where I can't stress enough. If you're working on a project so long, make sure to take some time to take a breather. Don't I wouldn't recommend you spending hours on a project without a break. Um, just because I was filming, I didn't really allow myself that chance to kind of, go out, take a moment to breathe, take a moment to really think about things how they're supposed to be. Um, and also keep in mind, I shoot these videos late at night, sometimes even at like 1 a.m. So it's just those things where unfortunately it's not the best. But later on, we correct it, and something like this backdrop went through a lot of versions. But that, in my opinion, that's a good thing because you learn from it. You learn, okay, what works from this, what works from that. Just because something doesn't work out one way doesn't mean it won't work if you combine it. And what I mean is like, and I go through this a lot when creating titles for these videos. But sometimes you want something that can fit certain criteria, and then you want something that can fit another criteria. And a lot of times people tend to want to go either or, but what I find is you have to find that middle ground. And that's the same thing with painting. Well, okay, maybe this method didn't work. Some pieces of the this method or this way that I painted the backdrop may work later on presenting that image of the backdrop. So when something doesn't work, okay, start from the beginning, but don't stress too much about it because you might have picked up something that might work with the other method you use. So don't scratch it completely off from the whiteboard or whatever you want to think about it. And so I'm going with the script liner, just adding in those details, making sure they're there and they're noticeable. And then afterwards, I go in with a 1 inch brush. That's the brush I usually use for blending. So I get that 1 inch and just blend it lightly. Don't want to destroy everything, but just have it there. And I'm going into that dark color and adding some of that dark, rich contrast into the hair. Now, the hair for me, it's good, but it can be better. And based off the background, there's a lot of room to create that contrast and play with with the perspective, pushing the model, Marializ, closer and the background farther. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just adding in that dark color, and then later on we're gonna um, add in some highlights onto her hair because the light is reflecting off her hair. But before I was gonna have two shades, but I thought it would be best if we approach it in this manner where the shades aren't drastically like gray and black. I want to have a more closer when it comes to value. And so just making sure I get most of it done. And later on, we do create that separation with the highlights and all that. It helps separate and just not make the hair look like one blob. We we want to give it form and character. So it's like the background, you have to have that base color in order to build on top of it. If you don't have a base, you cannot build on top of it, and it's very important you know where you're trying to go. As you can see here, I'm adding in some few little details on the hair, making them, trying to make the ends stand out a little bit more than the other. And so with thinned out ivory black, this is where I used ivory black because I wanted the ends to stand out. I'm going with thinned out black paint and just adding in little strands, letting the brush do the work, just curving the ends of it, because also her hair is not completely straight as you see in the reference. So I wanted to have that um what's the word? I wanted to have that indication of some waves and the hair kind of bending and moving. And so, yes, while the brush is doing most of the work and that thin out paint is doing a lot of the work, you also have to guide that brush into doing what you want it to do for you. So just continuing to add in those small little details of the hair strands. That way, when you get close to the image, you see those details and you're able to appreciate it more because you see all the work and the little details that are um, put into it. Now, of course, it's not something you would see when you're up close, but it's not something you see when you're far away, but it's something more that you see when you're up close. And you look at it and you say, oh, look at those little strands. Look, especially when it's dark, sometimes the paint doesn't contrast enough where you could see it from afar, but you can just notice it when you're up close to the painting and you see it, and it's really nice. So now we're going into the part where you start to add in all the highlights in the hair, and those highlights come from the light, because I remember clearly we put a light right in front of her when taking these photographs, and one of them is the reference. And so with the light hitting her straight up in the face, you start to see all the little reflections that go into her hair. Now, of course, that doesn't mean she has white hair and that she's older, but it just means it's showing the reflection of the light. And that's why it's important to be very careful not adding too much of that, because if you go too far, then it's going to look like she's an older woman, and we don't want that. And so on top of all that, I'm using white and a little touch of ultramarine blue. And so I'm going on top with even extra, just more clean white, more pure. That way it allows me to make it look more like highlights rather than white hairs. And so I had to kind of hold myself back. That way I don't overdo it, and where it just becomes an issue rather than having it complement the painting. Now, after adding in those highlights, I like to approach it as the way of you need a polar opposite to complement whatever you have. And so, with that bright highlight, I'm going back in with uh, ivory black thinned out, and I'm just adding in nearby and on the other side as well, just to kind of so they complement each other, and you can see the contrast. And so now I'm moving on to adding on the highlights in the face, whether it be the highlights she has on her forehead, whether it be the highlights near her eyes, her nose, her mouth, whatever the case may be. I'm using my base skin tone, which usually is a mixture of yellow ochre, cadmium red. If I want it a little more, alizarin crimson, and burnt umber, and some titanium white. And so what I'm doing is I'm getting mostly titanium white, but then I'm adding in a touch of that skin color. That way it's not pure white, but with that, it allows me to get these bright highlights without having to use pure white. Now the reason why I avoid using pure white is because when using pure white, you lose your biggest highlights. And later on, I believe on the last episode, I want to add in even brighter highlights. And so I go with basically pure white in some areas. It's very, very delicate. You can't put it on all the areas because it'll ruin it. But if you add a little bit of pure white on some areas, it complements it so much and it stands out even more. So if you think you have highlights, tone it down a little bit. Of course, still have it to be a highlight, but make sure it's not pure white or whatever color you may be using. That way, later on in the final product, you're able to use the pure colors. And with it being pure colors, they're usually the most vibrant and stand out the most. So, throughout this time frame, I'm just going back and forth, just making sure everything's up to my standard, and making sure I'm satisfied with it. It's something that can be a double-edged sword, and in this case it was for me, was the fact that I try to be a perfectionist, and with that I have to hold myself to a standard. And because of that, I spend more time going back and forth on the little stuff, even though in the next videos I cover that and I go more deeper in. So honestly, I would recommend you to fix stuff that bothers you. But if it's minute details that, yeah, they bother you, but it's not a big deal, leave them alone, because maybe down the line you fix it, and then you're just spending extra time if you're just going back and forth. And also, a thing that I would tell you is, when the paint's wet, it's harder to layer on. So if you're going back and forth, sometimes it's harder to get that contrast or that detail you're trying to fix, because the paint's just blending. As to oppose, if you wait for it to dry, you can layer on that and make it look more better. But that's just my opinion, and whether you use it or not, that's up to you. But right here, all I'm doing is just continuing all those little details, making sure I like the size of the lips, making sure I like the size of the nose, and all that stuff. So now you see me working a lot on the lip section, and the reason for that is because when I blocked in the face and all that, I did not go with the right tone for the lips. That was done intentionally. That way later on I can work on them and get them to where I want them based off the surroundings and the skin tones and all that. And so I'm fixing the lips, making sure they're not too big, not too small. And by doing so, I can just grab some skin tone color, and if they're too big, just make them smaller from the outside and just go back in with some red, which with those colors I'm using alizarin crimson, a little bit of a slightest touch of ultramarine. Um, oh wait, no, wrong color. Sorry, not ultramarine. Burnt umber, and cadmium red, medium, and then a very slight touch of white because we're trying to get that base color, not the highlight color. And so I'm just working back and forth. As you can see, I'm fixing the size of the lips by adding in some skin tone, and just little by little making sure I'm content with it. And right here, all I'm doing is um, adding in some highlights and also try and fix the eyes, because in the image you can see she has like a slight red on her eyelids, and so I'm going back in and just adding that and fixing the surroundings, because you don't want having to have a little bit of red but then the surroundings look completely off. And so I go back in there, I add in the eyelid line or whatever that may be. I forget the names, but I add that in with my liner brush or round brush, whatever the brush may be. I forgot, but it's a small, tiny brush. Think about it as a liner, and I'm just adding in that little details. And right here, I'm trying to be so careful, and it's gonna be hard for you guys to see, but I'm adding in the eyelashes, then I go back into the eyes, making the eyes more dark and saturated. That way they stand out more. So what I had done was I had um put like a very dark brown on the eyes, and while she does have a brown, since the light is hitting her, the brown is gonna look lighter. So I had to go back and use burnt umber, a little bit of bright red and yellow ochre, just to kind of make the brown a little more bright, and then around it outline with a little darker brown. That way where the light hits it, you see a little more brownish, and where the light doesn't hit it so much, you see more darker tones. And then I'm outlining the eye, going back with light color, making sure the whites of the eyes are looking not too bright, not too dark, and then just going back and forth, adding in the dark parts, adding in the light parts. As you can see, I'm just making sure they're rounded off, and the shape I'm content with, because once you lock them in, they're kind of there. You can't really change much unless you start all over again with getting the whites and painting on top of that color and doing layers and layers. So I spent a decent amount of time just trying to make sure they're where I want them to be and not something crazy. And the one thing I regretted here is I add in the highlight of the eye. I believe right here I'm adding in the pupil, so they'll hide in. But later on I add in the highlight, and the highlight was too bright. But in the moment I left it like is, and right now it just looks off. You'll see it towards the end. It's not 100% off, but you can see that based off the surroundings, in my opinion, it's a little too bright. I could have gone a little darker, but it is what it is. It's not a big deal. As you can see here, this is where I'm adding in the highlight, and it just, for me, it's a little too bright. I know most of you will probably say it's fine, and I agree, it's fine, but if I'm holding myself up to the standard, which I do, it's a little too bright. And it's those little things for me that matter the most, because even though everyone else is gonna say it's fine and not to worry about it, I'm gonna see it and I don't want to have to think about it twice. So now I'm going in with some ivory black and just same thing I did with the hair with the little strands and making it more detailed. I'm doing that with the eyebrows. That way when you get up close it doesn't just look like a flat block, but you see the little strands and the individual hairs. That way, at least for me, it looks a little more realistic and it stands out a little bit more. So just going, and it's very hard for me because the hair had wet paint, the background was wet paint. So for me, my hand has to be very close for me to have my hand stable. And there was really not much. And you just see me just putting my pinky on the background. And I ended up getting paint on my hand, but luckily I did not spread the paint around. So that's the more important part. As long as I didn't spread the paint onto parts where it didn't belong, then that's fine by me. And so just going back, making sure little things look right with the eyebrows, the eyes, and nothing looks too crazy. And now it's just the little things, just blending in the background, making sure everything looks right. As you can see, I have my palette to the side because I'm about to call it quits. But I'm going in with a little bit more paint and just going back to the eyebrows, because since they're individual hairs, you want to get them just right. As you can see, zoomed in, and later on you'll see when I'm signing off, you'll see the details more closer up, and why it's important to take your time on stuff like that if you're gonna get that detailed. If you're not gonna get so detailed, then it's okay. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up the video.
So that concludes today's episode. I know it's not to the degree I wanted to, um, but it simply is just layering on top and on top. Right now, since it's wet, some parts are not allowing me to get to where I want, and also I was struggling to lay my hand with the wet paint. So I'm gonna have to wait till tomorrow once again. Give it 24 hours, give or take. But you can see, let me zoom in. Okay, so now that we have it zoomed in, you can see all the little hairs and all the little details right there, um, with the highlights. So it's coming together. It's just little tweaks. Um, we still have to fix this part of the neck, and the neck is a little too thick, so we have to thin it out just a little bit. We can cover it with hair. Um, the shirt we have to fix, but the backdrop, it's almost there. It's not 100% there, but we'll get there little by little. It's just patience and key. Okay, so let's zoom out and I will sign out for today. 3, 2. Okay, so finally, after 2 hours, I know I spent 2 hours doing this. Uh, we're gonna call it a wrap. Tomorrow we'll be back and doing it. Well, I say tomorrow because I'm filming tomorrow, but um, the video is gonna be up next week. So again, I really appreciate you guys for sticking through, and I wish you the best of luck. And I'll see you next week. Have a good week. Have a good weekend. God bless each and every one of you. And until next Friday, take care and goodbye.